Andrew Lang is a central figure in late 19th century British folktale scholarship. Born in 1844 in Selkirk on the Scottish borders, Roger Lancelyn Green's biography presents Lang as a shy, dreamy and bookish boy. As a Snell scholar at Oxford, Lang studied classical moderations. At Oxford, Lang met Frederick William Longman, who helped steer his career into journalism. Lang also married his wife and writing partner Leonora Alleyne in 1875. Lang was a prolific writer encompassing many genres including folklore, anthropology, psychical research, religion, Scottish history and even fishing and cricket. He became a household name in the Victorian periodical publishing world. His theoretical folk tales are mainly scattered across articles and several introductions to volumes such as Margaret Hunt's Grimm's Household Tales in 1884 and Perrault's Popular Tales in 1888. During this period, folklore was viewed as a new cutting-edge human science with the ability to provide a view into anthropology of early human sciences. Folktale collections therefore became presented as anthropological specimens, blurring the boundaries between science and fairy tale. They were both source material for anthropologists and also nursery tales. With his wife, Lang edited the enormously popular coloured fairy book series between 1889 and 1910. However, Lang's fictional writings have been less well examined. This paper explores how Lang's interest in science and fairy tale mingle in his volume That Very Mab, 1885, and the Pantouflian Chronicles, Prince Prigio in 1889, Prince Ricardo in 1893, and the less successful Tales of a Fairy Court in 1907. During the late 19th century, the boundaries between fairyland and science were collapsed. Fairies and folklore, despite being concerned with the supernatural, incorporated the era's evolutionary scientific interests. A little bit of fairy dust could be added to Darwin's analogy of the entangled bank to make nature and beetles seem fantastical, yet also comprehensible. Fairies became conflated with insects and microscopic scientific processes by children's science books such as Arabella Buckley's The Science of Fairyland, written in 1879, Charlotte Maria Tucker's Fairy Know a Bit of Knowledge in 1868, and Lucy Ryder Mayer's Some of the Real Folk or the Fairyland of Chemistry in 1887. Laura Forsberg discusses how the microscopic world became enchanted by fairyland, bridging the cultural division between science and fantasy, becoming a symbol of scientific wonder that fosters an interest and engagement in the natural world. She argues that children's picture books and fairy illustrations bridge the gap between fairyland and the human world, transporting the reader imaginatively behind the veil into the fairies' miniature world. Meanwhile, Lang and his colleagues in the Folklore Society were studying folk tales using pioneering comparative methods, producing volumes such as Edgar Sidney Hartland's The Science of Fairy Tales in 1891, and Edward Clodd's Tom Tit Tot, an essay on savage philosophy in folk tales in 1898. The late Victorian scholarly folktale debates aimed at identifying why global folk tales often appeared to have similar storylines, motifs, and tropes. In 1891, the International Folklore Conference became a flashpoint for this debate. Andrew Lang argued for the polygenesis of some tales, proposing that similar plots appeared in multiple locations due to similar human mindsets and paths of cultural development. His colleague Joseph Jacobs conversely proposed the theory of monogenesis, that folk tales were created by a single genius and diffused by population migration adapted during multiple retellings. The Folklore Society had a grand project to tabulate folktale types from around the world according to plot incident in the hope of understanding their possible origins and distribution patterns. Marion Cox's Cinderella 345 variants, published in 1893, with a defensive introduction from Lang, provided the first and only volume of this project. With the intensity of these debates, by the 1890s Lang's interest turned towards the supernatural and psychical research, examining ghosts and what he called psychofolklore. Folktale during this period provided anthropologists with source material. They experimented with innovative methodologies to analyse the history of humanity, the science of fairy tales. Lang published the satire That Very Mab with poet May Kendall in 1885. It follows Queen Mab's return to England after missionaries despoil her pagan paradise in Samoa. She tours 19th-century English society with her knowledgeable owl companion as an onlooker to a variety of characters and events. That Very Mab has received very little attention from critics. Green describes it as a dull and disappointing book. It is not clear which aspects of the book Lang wrote. Green notes that although the poems are in Kendall's style, they seem to be inspired by Lang. Nevertheless, elements of Lang's wider work are clearly observable in Mab's characterization. The exhibition of machinery strikes the Queen with more horror than any other novelty in this country. She fears the mechanics, who would shortly invent machines who would conspire together to assassinate them and then share the profits. Mab reacts against the technologically advanced machinery, which is seen as a threat to her form of Fairyland. She is an ancient fairy queen, fearful of progress and nostalgic for a pagan past. Mab voices Lang's own despondency towards the 19th century industrialization and nostalgia towards fairies. Orwell describes his relationship with his own age was in some respects hostile or unsympathetic. Similarly, in Tales of a Fairy Court, when the time-travelling fairy timepiece is turned to the 21st century, Prince Prigio is scared of the new world of tourism, motor cars and gramophones. Buzz, what a noise of the wheels! Fugh, what a horrible smell of petrol! Mab, like Lang, it seems, preferred a quiet world away from the noisy industry. Lang also used Mab to satirically explore modern science and belief in fairies. Bown argues it rehearsed the incompatibility of belief in fairies and scientific knowledge. Mab is captured by a scientist, treated like a butterfly specimen, and categorized. It is also a scene which demonstrates how the similarities between fairies and insects became enshrined during this period. It is easy to see how a Victorian display of pinned butterflies with brightly coloured wings could inspire such connections. When the scientist's son starts worshipping the fairy, the scientist proclaims, "We have at last discovered the origins of religion. It isn't ghosts, it isn't the infinite, it is the worshipping of butterflies." The boy has returned to it in an act of unconscious inherited memory derived from Paleolithic man. In a tongue-in-cheek manner, Lang plays with the concept of searching for the origin of religion, a topic he had done much work on. Silver describes it as an amusing moment of self-satire. When the boy grows up and is sent to Eton, he becomes rationalized and could no more have composed a hymn to a fairy than he could have endured a false quantity. The fairy is situated in the world of childhood. Lang saw the act of schooling to destroy the element of fairyland within children. That Very Mab framed fairies as an irrational belief of children and a few eccentric adults who believed in faith healing and esoteric Buddhism and thought reading. Their presentation of the group is one which is grandiose, in vogue, but essentially a bit frivolous. Esoteric Buddhists are mocked for practicing a patent religion where people worship teacups and cigarettes standing where they ought not. Lang considered his interest in psychical research and would have been aware of some negative perceptions of people exploring spiritualism and occult practices. The modern technologically advanced scientific Britain was no place for Queen Mab. She is an anachronism 100 years on the wrong side, in fact a relic of paganism. It is seen as a place hostile towards fairies and ancient beliefs. Lang himself was open-minded on some supernatural phenomena, and often disagreed with more staunchly rationalist colleagues over supernatural phenomena. He held a wistful nostalgia for the mystery of fairy belief, and being dubbed the master of Fairyland. Gosse saw Lang as a fairy in our mists, with fleeting, fairy-like emotions, making him not seem altogether like an ordinary mortal. Lang's Pantouflia stories, Prince Prigio in 1889, Prince Ricardo in 1893, and the later and arguably less successful Tales of a Fairy Court in 1907, all burlesque and satirise courtly tales. Prigio begins with the fairies presiding over the royal baby's christening, with one cursing Prigio to be too clever, so clever that he won't believe in fairy magic. This is a familiar scene from fairy tales, in which an evil fairy curses a new royal baby. When the fairies arrive at court, the skeptical queen's behaviour burlesques non-believers and scientific rationalists who seemingly deny blatant evidence. Even though the fairy queens are physically present, the queen, choosing not to believe her own eyes, talks across them to the king. Lang perhaps satirises the blinkered scepticism he encountered when discussing psychical research. Tales of a Fairy Court revisited the christening scene, historicising it within post-Reformation disenchantment. The era is after Charles II and the Royal Society's foundation, and owing to the progress of science and the discovery of the celebrated apple by Sir Isaac Newton, people ceased to believe in fairies. In the year before this, in 1905, Max Weber had mooted this theory of disenchantment, contrasting the allegedly otherworldliness of Catholicism with the alleged materialistic joy of living of Protestantism. In Puck of Pook's Hill in 1906, Kipling similarly historicises the fairies' flit from the marshes during the Reformation. They too were doomed alongside Merry England and the saintly icons. Bookish and rationalist Prigio is eventually converted to fairy belief, using the fairies' christening gifts for his own adventures. Prigio is given every classical gift at his christening. These are the real agents of magic in the series. He gets a purse that could never be empty, 7-league boots, invisibility from a cap of darkness, a wishing cap, and a flying carpet. Several of these gifts are also found in the Blue Fairy book, which was edited around the same time as Prigio. Yuki Yoshino notes that characteristically magical powers of fairies were increasingly materialized within Victorian writing. Lang offers a self-satirical commentary on the rise of conspicuous consumerism during the era, a cultural trend that included his own pretty fairy books that were published every Christmas. Even fairy power had become commodified, but likewise Lang's stories were the gift of fairy magic for children. The over-reliance on fairy gifts is particularly highlighted in Prince Ricardo. Prigio's son Ricardo was brought up on nothing but fairy books, and he is constantly on quests. Ricardo, unlike Prigio, is entirely self-reliant on fairy gifts, and he has no personal gallantry. The boy hates science. When his companion Jacqueline drinks the moon using a Cornelius Agrippa spell and causes an unexpected eclipse which had not been predicted by the court astronomers, Ricardo declares, "I never thought there was much to physical science of any sort. Most dreary stuff." Prigio is concerned by Ricardo's behaviour. "We have not brought him up rightly. These fairy books are at the bottom of his provoking behaviour." Again, Lang gently mocks his own work. The excess of fairy magic causes Ricardo to lose his wit and intellect, merely going at a quest hammer and tongs. Ricardo uses the fairy gifts like machines to complete tasks. When Ricardo tries to replace King James with Prince Charles, his magical gifts make the job as easy as shelling peas. Ricardo plans to run to Rome in his 7-league boots, pick up Prince Charles, put him on the magic carpet, fly him to London, clap on the cap of darkness so nobody can see him. The listing of items is comical, and with the quest and adventure lost in the process. Ricardo subtly satirises the sheer abundance of fairy things, the emptiness of this new commodified fairyland. For Lang, a true fairy tale teaches a moral, where the adventurer gives his last crust to the hungry cat, which put in a good stroke when it comes to the final fight with the giant. For Lang, human interest and storyline was foremost in folktale.